On August the 6th, you posted the following on your X account. Welcome to kindergarten, Piers Morgan, as Douglas Murray welcomes you to preschool about Hamas, Israel, and the war in Gaza. When Arab League calls on Hamas to disarm and let all hostages go, it's time to figure out who the real bad guys are. Now, look, I don't want to get into an argument about your characterization of my school level at the moment. However, what I would say is, let's just start this, Ambassador, if I may, by, I think, me laying out my view about this war, and you tell me where you differ, and then we can get to where we are now, because you may find that we're a little closer than you think. My view has been very strongly from October the 7th that Israel had a fundamental right and indeed moral duty and imperative to defend its people, particularly given that Hamas said on the record after October the 7th, we want to keep doing this. So on that, I think we're in full agreement. I also believe that Hamas, along with what the Arab League says, should disarm, let all the hostages go, and play no further role in any government of Gaza ever. So I think they've abrogated that right after what they did on October the 7th. I also believe, however, that the way that Israel has been prosecuting this war this year in particular has seemed to me to have gone past a point of self-defense and into something very different. And that's what I wanted to explore with you, I think, because you're there and you have a very good understanding, I think, of what is going on the ground, and we can get to that in a moment. But my criticism of Israel is not about the country, it's not about the people. My criticism is very specifically about the Israeli government and the way it's prosecuting the war, because it seems to me that the strategy this year, which has involved a 3-month blockade in which they stopped food and aid going into Gaza, which many viewed as a criminal act against the civilian population, but notwithstanding that, that actually what Israel's done is relentlessly bombarded Gaza in its attempt to take out the remaining Hamas fighters. But by doing so, it has not succeeded in having any hostages released since February, and it doesn't appear to have been defeating Hamas. So my question for you, I think, off the top is, why are you convinced, as you seem to be, that this new strategy of occupying Gaza City and continuing a relentless bombardment of the population in Gaza is going to be any more successful than what we've seen this year so far, which has not, to my mind, been successful?
Piers, you've given me a lot to unpack right there, so let me see if I can do it. First of all, you're right. There's a lot of things you just said with which we agree. So I'm going to take you out of kindergarten. I'm going to put you all the way to the 2nd grade. I think you deserve that. So we'll start there.
Thank you.
I think it's important to understand that there's one bad guy in all this, and it's Hamas. And that's what I've said repeatedly. I've watched European countries put so much pressure on Israel because they don't like the way they're prosecuting the war. Whether people like the way they're prosecuting the war, it is their war. They dumped an enormous amount of humanitarian aid and food in prior to the blockade. That would have been more than enough to feed them throughout the blockade. But the problem was that Hamas was stealing the food. One of the reasons that Israel stopped the just almost unlimited supply of food going in was because Hamas was profiting off of it. They made $500 million last year selling it. And one of the things that was so outrageous was because they would steal the food. By the UN's own numbers, about 88 to 89% of the food going in has been stolen or looted. So that means that the people weren't getting the food, and I'll tell you who else wasn't getting the food: the hostages. I know you saw the video of the hostages a week ago when Hamas posted this hideous, disgusting video of hostages being tortured, being starved, and being forced to dig their own graves. They're not getting any of that food. So the problem has come that all the pressure from European countries and even Canada has been focused on Israel rather than focused on Hamas. And what I said in the tweet, and I know you didn't like it that much, but I was having a little fun with it. The point being, the Arab League unanimously said it's Hamas that ought to disarm. It's Hamas that ought to give up and recognize that they have no future. And they need to let all of the hostages go, not dribbling out. They need to let them all go at one time. I think Israel is right to call for that. To be honest with you, you mentioned about the plan to take Gaza City. We don't know how that's going to go. It could go sideways. I think everybody understands there's no guarantee that it will go well. I do know firsthand that Israel has put offer after offer after offer on the table in negotiations trying to get some type of diplomatic settlement. But Hamas is not interested in that. And it was just a little over a week ago that the U.S. decided they're not serious and got up and walked away and said there's not going to be a negotiation that is going to result in the release of the hostages. Now, after Israel has said, okay, we're going to move in more militarily, take Gaza City, suddenly Hamas says, okay, maybe we should meet. We'll have some more discussions. So one has to wonder, are they really serious about ending this? Are they really serious about doing it in a way that President Trump was very clear about? Hamas can't stay, and Hamas has no future in governing Gaza. That's important, because leaving Hamas, even a little bit, is like leaving the Nazis in Germany after World War II. And I don't think anybody thinks that's a good idea.
Well, I completely agree about that. So I think on that, I think it's important that people understand watching this that we do agree about a lot of the fundamental principles here. Hamas are the absolute bad guys in this war. They started this, and they should absolutely have no place in governing Gaza afterwards. But that doesn't mean that Israel can't also be held to, in my opinion, a higher standard than a terrorist organization. And Israel should expect, as the only democracy in the Middle East, to be held to a higher standard. And that's why the way that Israel behaves in the way it prosecutes this war has come under such intense scrutiny. And I would just ask you, as the ambassador there for the United States, that it must concern you when you see Germany heavily critical now of what Israel is doing, the United Kingdom, Italy, today calling the plans for the occupation of Gaza City a potential disaster. France, most other Middle Eastern countries, you'd expect them to. But so many of Israel's historic allies lining up now to say they have serious concerns about what is now happening in Gaza. Does that not give you pause for thought, Ambassador?
It certainly does, but perhaps in a slightly different way than you're feeling it. I wish those same countries would recognize that by them calling out Israel specifically and barely mentioning not only Hamas, but not even mentioning the hostages, if at all, maybe slightly, what they have done is empowered Hamas. And I think you probably saw the interview that Secretary Rubio did over the weekend. And one of the things he pointed out was the moment that these European countries started calling for a Palestinian state, and when they started saying Israel needs to do things differently, Hamas walked away from all of the negotiations and discussions, because in their minds, hey, they're winning. They're winning because the allies of Israel are spending more time attacking Israel and questioning the way they're doing things than they are in questioning Hamas. And I want to point out something I don't think most people have a clue about. Israel doesn't just go in and bomb the ever-loving bejesus out of Gaza. They send messages, leaflets, they give warnings to people, they tell them where they're going to hit, and they urge them, get out of this area. There's a rocket launcher there, there's a base there, there's a military structure there, and they're very specific, and they tell people to get out. Hamas takes its civilians and herds them to those very places that had been announced by the Israelis as a target. To be fair, I love my country, I serve my country, but my country, the United States, we don't tell adversaries where we're going to hit in advance of it. And Israel has done that consistently for as long as I can remember, back in the previous Gaza war in 2012, 2014. And quite frankly, nobody ever says that's kind of a spectacular thing to do. Yes, there's a lot of people that shouldn't have been killed or injured, and they are. It is a tragedy. But the tragedy started on October the 7th, and I think this is one of those areas where apparently you and I do agree. It started with the raping of women in front of their children, the beheading and burning in ovens of babies, lighting elderly people on fire as they sat in their wheelchairs, as their families were forced to watch it. And all of this, we know it happened, despite what some people deny. We know it happened because the Hamas terrorists, the savages, they videotaped it themselves because they were really proud of what they were doing. And they took it back and they showed it to their families and they showed it to the other people around them because they wanted them to see what they had done in the absolute heinous, unspeakable murder of innocent Jewish people who had done nothing to them. And they just woke up one Shabbat morning and here they come. And the horror that was unleashed upon them is equivalent to 40,000 Americans being slaughtered and massacred. And I wish more Americans put in that context that over 1,200 people murdered that morning is the equivalent of 40,000 Americans. And I promise you, if someone came and killed 40,000 Americans in one day, the difficulty would be to restrain Americans from wanting to do what Israel has been accused of, but absolutely has not done, and that's genocide. I've said this many times, Piers, if Israel is trying to commit genocide, they're really, honestly bad at it, because they could have done genocide on October the 8th. We know they have the military capacity, but they haven't. They have tried to spare civilian life, tried to contain the collateral damage, but they don't get any credit for that, appreciation for that. Instead, they get condemned by the very people that ought to be their allies and that ought to understand that if the same thing happened, whether it was in France or Great Britain or Canada or the Netherlands, I assure you that the people of those nations would not say, gee, we just don't like the way that you're fighting those who did this to us.
I would take issue with that because, as you said, 1,200 people were killed that day. It was horrendous. But in response, Israel has now killed north of 60,000 people, including over 20,000 children.
Let me pause. Let me pause there. When you use the term 60,000, let's remember that that figure comes from the Gaza Health Ministry, which is Hamas. And we don't know if this is anywhere near accurate. Plus, it also includes the terrorists. It's not just civilians, not 60,000 civilians. We don't know how many it is. It could be 15,000, it could be 50, it could be 60, and 3/4 of those could be the terrorists. So those numbers are a little hard to validate because they do include the terrorists themselves. And I'm not sure that that's a casualty that most of us are going to lose any sleep over and weep over. Well, here's the point I think we can agree on. We may argue about the numbers. Too many people have been killed in Gaza. Too many innocent civilians have been killed there. But I blame Hamas for their stubbornness. I blame them for putting their people in front of the targets, not even trying to protect them. In fact, trying to see that they did get killed because it's good for business for them. And that's what makes them the monsters they are. They're not protecting their innocent. They're putting their innocent in harm's way intentionally because they don't care if they get killed. And when I was in Gaza a little over a week ago and talked to Gazans inside, what I was really amazed by was they didn't hate the IDF, which I would have kind of thought they might. They loved America, which I was glad they did. But what really was interesting was that every single one of them said that they had had a family member who had been murdered by Hamas. They hated Hamas. They wanted nothing to do with them. They wanted them gone. They wanted them out of their sight, out of their country, out of their control, because every one of them had personally experienced heartache in their families because of what Hamas had done. When I was at those feeding sites and when I talked to Gazans, I did not hear anything other than, we love America, we're glad you've done this, and this is the first time we're getting food that we didn't have to pay for. Why does Hamas hate GHF? One of the things they demanded in one of the negotiations just 2.5 weeks ago was that GHF had to be shut down. Why would Hamas want to shut it down? I'll tell you why. Because GHF method of getting food has really hurt their capacity to control the food market, and it's costing them money. Otherwise, they would say, sure, Go ahead and bring the food in. All we care about is people getting to eat. But they don't care about people getting to eat. They care that they eat. And if you look at the people from Hamas, when they get photographed, they're well fed. None of them are hungry. I guarantee you, look at their faces, look at their bodies. And instead of food, they could use some Ozempic. But yeah, there's some real deprivation in that country, but it's not because GHF is killing people. What the people told me, it was Hamas that was shooting the folks coming to get the food, not only at the GHF sites, if they could get to them, but also at the UN sites.